So I had a brain hemorrhage, and again, completely out of the blue. And there was a whole lot of stuff that took place from me lying on the floor, then going to a coma basically. But in the morning, my parents couldn't wake me up. They'd got me back into bed and sorted me out. They couldn't wake me up in the morning, and they phoned an ambulance phoned the doctor. The doctor came around and he freaked out and he said, phone an ambulance, we've got to get her to hospital now. So they rushed me off to hospital, and in the operating theatre, I flatlined twice. So they're giving me brain surgery because they had to remove these little vessels that were up in my brain. They had to remove the clots that were causing the problem. It's called an AVM, if anybody's listening and wants the technical version, an AVM, arterial venous malformation. And so these things are fairly common. Well, I wouldn't say they're common, but these things happen, but they don't always happen in the brain, so you can get them in other parts of your body. So I had this AVM on my brain, and they're removing it on the operating table. I flatlined. They brought me back, and they said, okay, we've just got to fix her up. So we'll do the bare minimum just to get her back. And then I flatlined again. And that was the point when the surgeons thought, we need to abort this surgery. This is too dangerous. She won't make it. So it was just so amazing. I had the most skilled and incredible surgeons in there. They aborted the surgery. So they got me stable. They aborted the surgery. And then I woke up, I think it was about 5 days later. I need to go through my notes to know exactly how many days, but it was about 5 days later that I woke up in a critical care unit in the hospital. So this is the highest level of care that you can get. And I had tubes everywhere. I had all sorts of stuff going on. And I also had this really interesting experience. So I knew everything that had happened. I knew that I was really unwell. I knew that I'd had this brain bleed. I knew that I was paralyzed, because that was why I collapsed on the floor, was because I was paralyzed down the left side of my body from the bleeding on the brain. And the nurses and the doctors would come in and they would, try and tell me, say, hey, look, you've been really unwell, and try and explain why I was in hospital. I guess it's probably quite a natural thing to explain to a patient who's just woken up out of a coma. But I was getting really frustrated with them because I knew where I was. I knew what had happened. I knew that I was going to be okay. So it was quite a weird thing. I had this experience where I'd been in pitch blackness, and there was a voice, and it was talking to me. It turned out to be my father's voice. My father was alive at the time, which for near-death experiences, I research them quite heavily now. So that's not so common to have a living person in the experience. Quite often people see people who have passed, or people, from centuries ago, family connections. They see their ancestors or whoever, but I had my father in my experience, who was alive at the time, quite often in the hospital. And so he was communicating with me, and I was trying to interact with him, and I couldn't. But I never saw him. I could just hear this voice, and it was like he was in my ear, so a part of me and so close to me. And at the same time, he was like galaxies away, so far that I can't even comprehend how far away. So he was it was like he was in two places at once. And I was trying to interact with him, and I was trying to connect with him, but I couldn't find where he was. I couldn't see him. I couldn't work out where I was, because I was no longer in a body. I was no longer, head, shoulders, arms, legs, or so. And I was in this pitch blackness. And eventually he asked me to squeeze his hand. I squeezed his hand, which was really, really hard to do. There's a bit of backstory around that about how hard I was trying. It's because I don't necessarily know that I had a hand, and I couldn't find him. Jeff, I just can't even put this into words, because it is so not something you can actually explain. But anyway, I managed to get a little twitch out of my finger, or something like that happened. And then there was this booming, silent white light. And I was in this place of just absolute whiteness. It was just love and celebration, and it was just the most amazing feeling that I have ever experienced. And so I'm in this thing, and there's people all around me, like beings, And I can remember trying to look at them, and I can remember trying to work out who they were, but I never got the chance to see their faces. It was like they were silhouette people. They were there and they were so familiar and they were so incredible, but I don't know who they were. So I was 12 years old at the time. I hadn't had a lot of death in my life. I hadn't even been to a funeral. First funeral I went to was when I was 18. Death was not a familiar thing for me. I had no preset beliefs. I had no concept of death, really. I was young. My worldview wasn't formed yet. So I'm in this place with all of these people cheering and celebrating, and there was music, and there was just, it was about me, which sounds really self, but they were welcoming me. And it was like I'd come home. I can't explain it, but just the most beautiful experience. And the last thing I remember is there were these beings all around me. I'd say there was probably about 7 or 8 of them. And I was trying to look and trying to get their face, trying to understand who they were and get some detail of who they were. And then, boom, I was back in my body and I was waking up from my coma. And so I don't remember leaving that place, traveling there. It was literally, it just happened. And it was the most unusual experience. So I woke up out of this coma, and there were doctors and nurses trying to tell me, what had happened to me. And I was going, I know. And I knew so many facts, whereas I couldn't have really, because I'd been in a coma. There was no way that I could have known the stuff that I did. And I could also see my parents getting in the car, coming to, because they'd got the news that I'd woken up, coming to the hospital. I could see different things happening in different places at the same time, which is a very hard one to explain, because it's not really something that we experience here. It's not something that you can explain. And I knew without a doubt that everything was exactly as it needed to be.